Here's a guy that's caught in the midst of a spiritual battle. He has no idea how to fix his situation. He don't know how to get out of the spot that he's in. He just realizes he is in a miserable situation here. And I think it's interesting to note that Jesus, in a couple of chapters before this, had gone through some trying times. He had healed some people, and the Pharisees were questioning him and trying to find fault, and people were coming against him. And so he gets into a ship or a boat, and he goes to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And when we pick it up in chapter 5, the boat comes into the shore. Jesus steps off the boat, and wouldn't you know it, where they land the boat is real close to a cemetery. There's some tombs going on around here, and as they come into land, all of a sudden this guy comes into focus. Verse 2 says that when Jesus came, this dude showed up. Just showed up out of nowhere. Hey, how y'all doing? Got to get the picture now. This fella didn't look like just your average Joe. I'm not exactly sure what his appearance was, but I can tell you a couple things. He had some chains and fetters that was tied to his hands and feet. He had some differences about him because he had scars on him where he had been cutting himself and living in the tombs day and night. This guy had gone through what some of us might describe as hell on earth. And literally that's not far from the truth, because he was possessed with demons of hell. And you know what? I believe today we still have problems with demon possession in the world that we live in. And I realize America, we try to explain everything away. You think you can fix a demon possession with a pill? You think you can give them some counseling? You think we can lock them up and keep them away from folks? You know something? The biggest thing that we can do sometimes is bring people to this man named Jesus and let him make a difference in their life. The guy that Jesus seen, I believe, is searching desperately for some answers, but he just don't know the right questions to ask. And I think in verse 2 when it says, when he was come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. This guy right here had no hope whatsoever. He wanted help desperately, but he just didn't know where to go or who to turn to. I imagine he had been locked up many times. They had counseled with him. They had given him medication. He had been to the doctors. He had probably been to the churches. He had done everything he could do to get better. He had tried to turn over a new leaf. He had tried to begin a new start in his life, but everything he done failed miserably. Does it kind of sound familiar to some of our experiences? But until one day when Jesus showed up. I like that song Brother Zach sang, when Jesus came looking for me. Can I tell you something? Jesus came looking for this guy right here. You don't know why Jesus probably had to come looking for him? Because this guy had got to the point that nobody wanted him in their churches anymore. Nobody wanted him in their little circle of friends any longer. Nobody wanted to hang out with someone as mean and as violent and as rough as this guy here. And nobody cared about him. They had kind of written him off and put him off in the tombs in the cemetery. But then Jesus came looking for him. And immediately the guy came running out of the tombs to see this one named Jesus. I want to share a couple thoughts with you this morning as we look at these scriptures. The thing I want to talk about first of all is fighting a spiritual battle without Jesus. This guy did not have the Lord in his heart. He did not know all the right questions or the right places to look for help. One thing he did know is that he did not have any hope whatsoever. But living without Jesus in the midst of a spiritual battle will affect your life in multiple ways. And I want to share with you about 3 ways that this Bible tells me that this guy's life was affected because he was involved in a spiritual battle without Jesus. And that's what a lot of our problems is in America. We're involved in spiritual battles and we try to write it off as a health issue or an emotional issue or whatever the case may be. And oftentimes it might just be a spiritual issue. This morning I'm going to ask, if the Lord speaks to your heart, you listen to what he has to say and ask God that he'll talk to us. 3 things that I say fighting a spiritual battle without Jesus will affect. Verse 3 says, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, no, not with chains. This guy dwelled in the cemetery. Verse 5 says, day and night he was in the mountains and then crying out, cutting himself from the tombs. This guy's first thing that affected was his home life. Can I tell you, this guy had a miserable home life. I bet he had a grumpy wife. You want to know why I think that? Because he chose to live in the cemetery instead of going home at nights. Things can't be real good. Some of y'all thought you had a problem because your man wants to hang out and drink at night. This dude hung out in the cemetery. I think you could explain away the bar a little easier than you could the tombs in the cemetery. He had a miserable home life. You say, well, bless God, I know why she was grumpy. Look what she had to listen with. Amen. If she had to live with that, I'm sure she was kind of grumpy and contrary, and we would be too. But I'm telling you, this guy's home life suffered because he did not know what he was involved in. He was in the midst of a spiritual battle and never even realized what was going on around him. Some of us, if we're honest, will have to admit our home life has suffered because we are in the middle of a spiritual battle, and the Lord is pulling for us, and the enemy, old devil, is pulling against us. And today we've got to make a choice on which side of the fence we're going to be on. This guy had run and lived in the mountains and in the tombs and in the cemeteries, and his home life was shot. I bet when he did go home, his wife probably run and hid. His kids probably was afraid whenever Daddy come in because they knew he was a wild man. And you know what? We tend to hurt the people we love the most. And so I have no doubt that his wife, his children suffered deeply at his hands. Why? Because he was living in turmoil. Inside of this guy was a war raging for the security of his heart. He had a spiritual battle going on inside of his mind that we cannot really comprehend until you've been where he's at. But if you've been living in misery like he was living in, then my friends, you would be willing to run and see Jesus as soon as he showed up too. I think it's interesting to note that in my personal opinion, I expect this old boy had probably been to a church or two in his day. He'd probably looked for a little bit of deliverance. But you know what? When he showed up at church, he probably got all the wrong attitudes, because sometimes we think we clean up so much at church that we can't lower ourselves to the standards of one crazy man living in the cemetery, cutting himself and crying out all day and night long. And when he walked in church, they probably turned their nose up at him. When he walked into the house of God, people probably said, thank God I ain't like that heathen right there. And you know what? When you have that attitude, it ain't no wonder people won't come back to church. And this guy had probably been to churches like that, had probably been rejected, and he probably thought, why in the world should I even try? The people that are supposed to show the most love, the people that are supposed to be the children of God, they don't care about me. Surely nobody else does either. His home life suffered, but then he saw Jesus. Now remember, this is on the other side. Jesus hadn't spent a whole lot of time here like he has back in Israel. But this guy in verse 2 says immediately he went out to meet this cat named Jesus. Not only did his home life suffer, but look at verse 4. His freedom suffered. Verse 4 said, because he had been often bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder or broken or ripped off, and the fetters broken in pieces, neither could any man tame him. Verse 4 tells me that this cat had been locked up time and time again. He was so wild that when they would put the handcuffs on him, he'd bust them. Wouldn't that be cool to do? I just thought that would be really neat, you know. Law lock you up, bam, that ain't nothing, buddy. Lock me up again, bam, that ain't nothing. Well, I'd bound to frustrate a few cops. You keep messing up our handcuffs. This guy had been locked up more times than he could imagine. Not only did they lock him up, but they chained him down. When they put the cuffs on him and put the fetters on him and chained him to the ground or chained him to some big old rock, this old boy got filled with the spirit of the devil and broke those chains. I'm telling you today, you cannot control a spiritual battle. You think you can control yourself. You can't do it. You think you can make yourself a good person. You can't do it. I'm telling you, folks, you cannot control a spiritual battle that's going on no more than they can control this man here. And because of that, his freedom had been taken away. You say, well, he broke loose, he's escaped. He still ain't free because he's a prisoner of his own heart and his own mind. And if we're honest with us today, I bet you we got a church full of people that's a prisoner inside their own hearts and inside their own homes today. This guy's home life had suffered. His freedom had suffered. I want you to notice one more thing that suffered in verse 5. It tells me this.